It is really my great pleasure to moderate this this very fancy panel. And I would like to introduce our speakers. We have 4 speakers for today, and they are coming from different department. We have Professor Bao Zhiming from Department of English Language and Literature. We have Professor Vincent Chua and Professor Irene Y.H. Professor Vincent Chua coming from Department of Sociology and CIPR of AUS. Professor Irene Y.H from Department of Social Work and also the Social Service Research Center. Next, we have Professor Bussarawan Teerawichitchainan. We call Professor Bussarawan as Professor Book. Yeah. She's from Department of Sociology and also Center of Family and Population Research. I would like to say, like Professor Vincent Chua, Professor Book, they are the co-director of CIPR, and also Professor Irene Y.H is the director of Social Service Research Center. And last, we have Professor Wang Yi-Chen from Department of Geography. So this is a very fancy panel, as I said, because we are having linguists, geographer, social worker, and sociologist. We are from different departments. And also, these wonderful researchers will use different kind of data, from language data, spatial data, survey data, network data, to address various issues such as health, social support, job market. And I hope you enjoy this panel. And now, firstly, let me invite Professor Bao Zhiming to give the first talk. Professor Bao, yeah.
Okay, let me share my screen. Hold on a second. Okay, so today I will discuss very briefly what I've been doing for the past few years. And what we're trying to do is to look for linguistic markers of cognitive impairment. Because the belief is that the language will manifest issues with the mind, and this is the what we are trying to do. And it's also computational in some ways, because it's what we try to do is to use simple data, 10 minutes of your talk, ordinary talk, and then probably we'll see whether we can detect something that will indicate some form of cognitive impairment. Here our focus is on mild cognitive impairment, which is actually pre-clinical stage of dementia. So this is what we'll do. So what we'll do is I'll describe the computational method. And then we'll look at speech rate, some simple ones, and then look at some words and look at some phrases. And it's not really completed yet, because the data collection is actually quite time consuming, especially during the pandemic time when where the project actually stopped for more than a year because of the restrictions. But anyway, we do have data that would be probably enough for us to do a kind of a full-scale study. Okay, now briefly, what we'll do is there are lots of studies focusing on cognitive impairment, other than, of course, the doctors. From a theoretical linguistics, people study the language output of one particular person who died of dementia, but before he died, he was like a storyteller. So there was lots of recordings that he did over like decades of his life, especially from the time when he was diagnosed with dementia to and earlier periods, and see how his language changes. This speaker was a speaker of native Indian language in America, North American Indian language. So it's very complex morphology. The word forms is very complex. And then, of course, from computational linguistics, they also take a look at the language of people who have developed various forms of cognitive problems. And then there's also linguistics and neuroscience that studies brain imaging and link that with their language output. And what we are looking at is mild cognitive impairment. And some of the findings we have produced are consistent with what is called frontal temporal degeneration, because this is the form of dementia that's caused by brain areas that are responsible for processing nouns and verbs. But today, I'll just discuss some very general issues here. So this is a recent study of this sort of thing that we are trying to do. So you have nouns. This is output of a patient with, let's say, behavioral variant frontal temporal degeneration. And then this is for every 100 words, you have 14, roughly 15 words which are nouns. For noun, non-fluent agrammatic PPI is primary progressive aphasia, then you have nearly 17. But for semantic variant, this is the kind of a full-fledged dementia that its preclinical stage is amnestic mild cognitive impairment, meaning memory-related issues. And you can see then there are fewer nouns here. And for verbs, it doesn't appear to be all that much. So this is a snapshot of one of the studies that have been done by people at UPenn. And so what we'll do is very simple things, because for instance, the study that I cited use interview data from patients that are being treated in UPenn Hospital. But what we are doing is simply recording people who are healthy, or who otherwise healthy, even people who suffer from mild cognitive impairment. They are healthy in many other ways, and they are independent, and so on. So what we do is we'll just record and speech, and then transcribe it. And what we do then is to tag nouns and verbs, what is called parts of speech. And we use common tools like Tagger from Stanford and also Parser from Stanford. These are common natural language processing tools. Then, of course, when you tag the words, you have to vet it because they make mistakes. For standard English, the mistake rate the error rate is very good. It's like 3 or 4% error rate. Whereas if you use the same tagger parser to tag Singlish data, because our data spoken English is essentially Singlish, then usually it's about 10% tagging, and then more than 20% parsing. So the vetting has to be done manually, and this is why it's time consuming. Some examples is from our recordings. Don't eat means don't eat. It's very common if you know Singlish, right? And then all the maza is not the cheap one. So this is if you feed that into a English parser, the parser wouldn't understand it. But this is a part of the language that we are dealing with. Okay, now having done that, this is some of the things that we can gather. Very rough calculation, not publishable yet because Obviously, to make the data publishable, you need to make sure that the time is kind of handled properly, because recordings will include other things because they're not actual words uttered by individuals. But this is crude recordings. You know, the so-called time is simply recordings length. But anyway, you can still see the trend. WPM is word per minute. So for category 1 is healthy. Cat 1 is healthy. We now have 163 people and roughly 146 words per minute. And for category 2, which are people, refers to people who have mild cognitive impairment, it's 133. And category 3 are people who are clinically suffering from dementia. So this, but we only have 2 people, so it's even slower. And then we have, of course, lots of people who have not been diagnosed as yet. You know, if you listen to Channel News Asia, there's the Merdeka memories of some notable Singaporeans telling their life stories, and average per speed is about 162. So this is, to give you some idea of that, at least this is our focus category 2, named MCI people, they decline. It would be significant if we run, let's say, a statistical analysis. And then now, if you look at speech by age and diagnostic status, if you say have a 60 and up, this is reporting a project that enrolls people, Singaporeans who are 60 and older. So if you look at people who are minus 70, meaning 60s, this is the speech rate is 150. But older 70 and above is 134. So there is an age effect. As we get older, and then our speech rate declines. We speak slower and slower. But it's interesting, among people who are diagnosed with MCI, there's not much difference. In fact, it's even a little bit marginally faster. So there is, in other words, it seems to me that the effect of the MCI will override the effect of normal aging. That appears to be the case. So, but that's and then if you look at by gender, so category 1, then female is 163, male is 133. Men talk slower than women in this group, although in broader population, men typically speak faster than women on average. But in category 2, you can see then compared with this, there's also decline, but the decline is more severe in men. And this would be the difference, category 1. So there is a kind of a serious decline there. And then Chinese, so we also have some Chinese because we have about 60 plus Chinese recordings. So we don't know how to count words, and we only know how to count characters in Chinese. And as you can see, there is still a decline, but not severely. But probably it isn't even statistically significant. So we don't know how to do Chinese data yet. But this is characters per minute. And okay, now if you look at the words being used, the one type token ratio refers to a particular word, how often that word is used. So it would be then token. So if you use the same word over and over again, that's an indication that the vocabulary is not very rich. So if you have a rich vocabulary, you tend to use many words, and each word only maybe once or twice. But in any case, this is what we have. It's not all that different. So TTR type token ratio there is no difference between the two groups anyway. Whereas if you content to word ratio, how many lexical words you use in your speech, it's roughly the same. So there is no difference. The only difference here is actually in the people with MCI use fewer system words, what we call function words, like prepositions, the and But here in Singapore, quite often the prepositions are not used as often as they are in, let's say, standard American English. Because if you say, I go market, you will not use to usually. I go to market, I go market. So you will have one fewer tokens of to. And so that might be a result of that instead of kind of a pathology. And but anyway, it's consistent with the other findings in people reported in this study that I cited earlier, where there the functional lexical density and type token ratio, there's no difference. As we in our own normal interaction, normal experience, people who have, let's say, dementia, they can speak. But if we look closely, things might be different. Okay, so this is type token ratio. And now the more interesting thing is actually the structure. And this is the part that we have not really done enough of that. We are now looking at that because it can only be done manually. We have 1 million words. We have to do like examine each word a few times. So if multiplied by 1 million words, that's going to be a lot of time. So, but this is a sample only of 9,000 words. If you look at complex noun phrases, this is the definition. Like if you say the cat with black hair, the cat that I saw, the cat that saw me, those are complex noun phrases. Compared with, let's say, a cat, a large cat. So those are simple noun phrases. So the ratio, if you look at it for normal people, is 10%. Complex noun phrases is 10% of the overall noun phrase. But the people with MCI, it's half that. In other words, there is a structural effect. The pathology, whatever that is, we don't know. Maybe most likely due to, let's say, frontotemporal degeneration, it will affect the use of complex structures. And this is, at least this much would be clear. And also, if you verb, the difference is not as drastic. Here is so-called verb clusters is when you see, for instance, if you saw the cat saw the bird, but if you say the cat has seen the bird, has seen, you have a cluster. And the cat may see the bird, and so on. Or in Singlish, the cat got see bird, I got eat durian, things of that sort. So those are the complex, the verb complexes. As you can see, the difference is not all that big. There's a slight decline, but this is not significant. Okay, so this is what we have found up to this point, namely speech rate declines, approximately 10% more, sometimes more. Content words, there's no difference. People tend to use the same nouns and verbs in the same way, and so on. But complex structure does, there is an effect of cognitive impairment in the use of complex structures. Okay, so this is all I have to report. It's very boring. It's all about words, but I hope I didn't use too much of the time.
Thank you, Professor Bao. It's not boring. It's very exciting actually to see the linkage between the language use and the dementia. Yeah. Now I give mic to Professor Vincent Chua and Professor Irene for their presentations. Yeah.
Okay.
Vincent, yeah.
Thank you, Qiushi. Let me share my screen.
I will unshare mine.
Okay. Okay, I believe you can see this.
Okay.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Just a bit of background about this study before I go into the contents proper. The research is based on an SSRTG grant on in-work poverty in Singapore, right? So the PI for this project is Professor Irene Y.H. And beginning in 2019, we set out to study three things in particular, right? The first is the work histories. The second is the work conditions. And the third is the work outcomes of lower income adults in Singapore, aged between 21 years old and 38 years old. And then, of course, then to compare it with higher income adults in the same age range. The plan is underway to do this longitudinally because we are tracking changes over time and therefore to collect a second wave of data. But for now, let us share some findings from the first wave of data collection. Okay, for emerging adults in particular, jobs are very important, right? Why? Because adulting brings with it new responsibilities and commitments, such as setting up a household, getting a loan, raising a family, and so on. And jobs make these things possible. Employment promotes employee well-being. It raises social esteem as well. By contrast, unemployment diminishes mental health, lowers morale, and heightens anxiety. Job insecurity and job precarity makes it hard to plan for the long term or to envision a future. So employment is also a source of social capital, a chance to meet new people, as well as to feel connected to society at large. Now, so just want to underscore the point that jobs are important for doing and fulfilling goals in life. And with this preamble, we would like to pose three questions. Now, the first question is this: how do young adults enter their jobs? What methods do they use? And how prevalent are those methods? The second question is, how effective are those methods in shaping the job outcomes? And the third question, are there differences between groups in the methods used and the outcomes, even as jobs are being pursued? Okay, so these are the three questions we have set out to explore. Now, the hypothesis for the study, at least for this particular presentation, is as follows. As Singapore is a meritocracy, which emphasizes formal qualifications, we predict that well-educated groups will rely on formal strategies, such as degrees and diplomas, to get a job. These lead to better jobs on account of human capital, but also because formal jobs are characterized by a wide search for the most qualified candidates. Okay, so the well-educated groups, we hypothesize would rely on their degrees and diplomas to get a job. And these jobs tend to be correlated with high earnings because those jobs often entail a wide search for the most qualified candidates. By contrast, less educated groups, not having the advantage of paper qualifications, would have to rely more actively on informal strategies, such as the use of job contacts as a substitute for the lack of paper qualifications. And this leads to poorer jobs on account of human capital deficits, but also because these jobs are based on word of mouth, are less stable, subject to less scrutiny, and may present as short-term stints that focus on worker reliability rather than worker expertise. Okay, so that's our hypothesis going forward. And what we actually want to test is the idea of divergent pathways, right? A bifurcated situation of well-educated young adults adopting one kind of strategy, right? Degrees and diplomas and getting good jobs. That's on one hand. But on the other hand, of less well-educated young adults adopting another kind of strategy, job contacts, but getting less favorable jobs in the process. And here we draw upon Kellerberg's work. He writes about the US, but the ideas are relevant beyond the US in a wider context of globalization that has created situations such as the polarization of job quality, the hollowing out of middle-class jobs, the rise of market-mediated forms of employment that include temporary as well as non-standardized forms of work, for example, jobs in the gig economy, and the rise of a new inequality of insecurity reflected in different outcomes for different groups. Okay, so the hypothesis that we want to test here is the idea of bifurcated pathways, right? The well-educated using their education to get good jobs, the less well-educated using their social networks to get jobs that are not so favorable, right? That's the idea we want to test through this study that we are presenting here today. Now, the data is as follows. The sample comprises 1,600 respondents, and these are respondents who are working, making up two principal groups, target group and comparison group. Now, the target group refers to the low-income group, comprising those with a polytechnic education and below, with household incomes less than 5,000. And the comparison group refers to the high-income group, comprising those with polytechnic education, but with household incomes 5,000 and more, as well as those who are university graduates. Okay, the gender composition, as you can see there, is balanced. The racial composition is as follows: 55% Chinese, 31% Malays, 13% Indians, and 1% others. Now, without further ado, let me share some results from our analysis. Now, the first is this. In the survey, we asked respondents, for your current main job, did you get your job through a personal contact or a personal network? And the answer is either yes or no, right? Now, we find here that lower income respondents report 46% of them got their jobs through a network. By contrast, the comparison group, and this refers to the high income earners, 37.5% got their jobs through a network, right? So this is a 9% percentage point difference, which is quite big. And clearly, the lower income and lower educated groups are relying more actively on networks to get a job, right? So it supports our hypothesis that lower status groups have to rely more on job contacts as a substitute for finding a job in place of qualifications. We also asked our respondents, right, thinking of your current job searches, how much did you use the following channels, right? And we have a list of channels here: hard copy advertisements, online social networking groups, advertisements, employment agencies, as well as asking your personal contacts, job fairs, and so on. And for each item, we basically ask them, how much effort did you put in looking for these jobs, right? So not at all, hardly, sometimes, a lot, and all the time. So the higher the mean, the more often, longer, and harder they are pursuing these respective lines. And in a sense, we would argue this question actually measures the amount of persistence and the amount of efforts that job seekers are actually putting into the job search itself using each of these respective lines. Now, as for the results, we see that the target group, now this refers to the lower income group, would have to be more persistent, right? They are using more a range of methods, hard copy advertisements, advertisements in messaging ad groups, employment agencies, as well as job fairs. And they also score higher in terms of the use of personal contacts. In other words, The poor are putting in more efforts. They have to knock on more doors and for longer in order to secure their livelihoods. The poor have to do more, right? Different kinds of avenues, knocking harder, knocking longer in order to secure a job. Next, we probe further into the social network, right? So we ask, for your current main job that you have now, did you get the job through a personal network, personal contact? And there are three options here, basically, right? The first is, yes, I asked the person who told me about the job. Okay, so the person is asking for help from another contact, and we call this searching. Okay, now for option 2 and 3, yes, I did not ask, but a person who knew I was looking for a job contacted me. And yes, I did not ask, but a person who did not know whether I wanted a new job contacted me. So option 1 would be searching, because I'm searching for a job. I'm asking people whether they can help me or not. But options 2 and 3 is a bit different. This we label as non-searching, because I did not ask for help, but a person who knew I was looking for something contacted me in both instances, options 2 as well as options 3. Now, for all of these options, 1, 2, and 3, they are all network mechanisms, right? But the difference is this: for option 1, you had to ask. Okay, but for options 2 and 3, the job came to you without you asking for the opportunity, right? So the information and the job opportunity came to you unsolicited, and in a sense, the job landed on your lap. Okay, and you were able to benefit from the information that came to you without you consciously asking for an opening. Now, what did we find? Very interestingly, we found that among contact users, that the low-income group has to proactively mobilize their social networks to get a job. By contrast, the higher income group has the jobs looking for them. Okay, so we find a pattern whereby the target group, the lower income group, has to very actively look for work through their networks and through responding to advertisements and so on. But the comparison group, more likely they find themselves in a situation where the job looks for them. Okay, so target group looks for work, comparison group, the work looks for them. Okay, so that's an important difference, because for the comparison group, at least, to the extent that the work looks for them, this actually reflects the opportunity structure that wealthier people, wealthier job seekers are embedded in. Then we ask even further, right? For the people that help you get a job, who are they and what are their characteristics? Now, we found that lower income respondents are more likely to use strong ties to family as well as to friends. But on the other hand, higher income respondents are more likely to use weak ties, ties to co-workers as well as to acquaintances. So this is actually classical Mark Granovetter, where high income respondents are harnessing the strength of weak ties in the job search, while lower income respondents are relying more on strong ties. Okay, so we see a pattern where low income respondents are relying on close ties, ties to family and friends to get a job, but wealthier respondents are relying on acquaintances as well as co-workers to find work, right? So the types of people that they seek help from are correspondingly different depending on whether the person is of high SES or low SES. Now, moving on to the outcomes, we find an income differential between the two groups. So the target group made up of low SES job seekers, we find that the mean income is about $2,000. But for the comparison group made up of high SES respondents, their mean income is about $4,000, right? So it's a $2,000 difference in terms of the pay. And I suppose the burning question is, in fact, whether the social network has a role in reproducing this earning differential. Okay, so let me just share the results pertaining to this. The answer, the long and short of it, the answer is yes. Okay, we ran some regressions with interaction terms. And you can see here that this coefficient here, 0.18 with 2 stars, you can see here that the effect of non-searching on earnings is greater for higher income groups than for lower income groups. Okay, that's the first finding. And the second is this, that the higher income group is also more likely to use contacts who are university graduates, and those contacts generate earnings at a faster rate for high income group individuals as opposed to low income group individuals. Okay, the regressions do also control for some important covariates such as age, full-time, part-time work, gender, as well as race. So this diagram that I'm going to show you here actually summarizes our findings. You can see on the x-axis, you have the 3 forms of job search. The formal search, this is responding to newspaper advertisements, for example. The informal search refers to the search strategy whereby the person is asking for help, okay, consciously from a network. And the third is non-searching. This is the job that lands on the respondent, lands on the lap of the respondent without the respondent actually having to ask. Okay, and you can see that what's significant here is the uptick here, that the impact of non-searching on earnings is in the y-axis, the impact of non-searching on earnings is amplified in the high status group. Okay, so non-searching is especially efficacious, non-searching is especially advantageous for high SES job seekers. And that's what the study is showing. Now, which I suppose begs the question, right? What's driving this? And in fact, we found that non-searching high status ties are driving a lot of these effects. It is the resource that is embedded in non-searching that in fact produces the uptick in earnings for the high SES group. Okay, which I suppose then also begs the question, why is non-searching high status ties less effective for the less wealthy group, right? This line here, why does it go straight as opposed to go up in the same way that it would for high SS groups? Well, I think it's got to do with the nature of low-paying jobs that are highly substitutable, especially by foreign labor, which then keeps those wages down, even if high-status contacts were used. Okay, so I think that's one of the reasons as to why we see an uptick for the comparison group, but not for the target group. Okay, this is my last slide. I will just end with a discussion of some theoretical contributions. Now, there are 2 theoretical contributions I suppose we want to try to make. The first is this, that the rise of non-searching in job searches that a scholar Steve McDonald talks about as becoming more and more prevalent, actually at the end of the day only applies to high status groups, right? It is not a generalizable phenomenon. It certainly doesn't apply to all, but in fact, it's quite specific to wealthier job searches, okay, and not something that everybody benefits from just by virtue of using it. The second contribution is this, that the diverse pathways that have come to characterize the labor markets that Kallenberg talks about, these aren't just a matter of human capital differentials or about structural changes alone, but are supported at least partially at the meso level by inequalities in social capital, right? In the access to as well as the payoffs accrued from social capital across groups. Okay, so globalization, structural changes in the market, and so on, differences in human capital do probably explain divergent pathways. But I think in this presentation that we have, we want to argue that it is the social network, it is the social capital that has a role to play in reproducing these divergent pathways. In other words, the network mechanism has itself become a force for the reproduction of inequalities in this instance. Okay, so here non-searching becomes the means by which resources travel from high status contexts to their job seekers to leverage the job outcomes of the wealthier group. And basically that's what we are finding, right? That the network has a role to play in generating these divergent paths that we are seeing, separating high SES and low SES workers. Okay, I think that's the end of it for me. So with that, I end, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Vincent. Now let's move to Professor Book.
Could you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Oh, hold on a sec. All right. Thank you so much, Qiushi, for organizing this session and for inviting me to be part of it. So the study that I'm going to present today is largely descriptive, so it may not live up to the expectation of the conference theme, which is computational social sciences, but I hope it's informative. So the main goal of this study is to conduct a situation analysis of family care for frail older persons with long-term care needs in China and Thailand. So for those of you who are not very familiar with long-term care, so this is the term refers to a wide range of services to assist people who cannot independently perform activities of daily living due to the decline in physical or cognitive functions. So I have 4 research questions. The first question is, who among older Chinese and Thais is more likely to require long-term care? And to what extent do older persons with long-term care needs receive care support? And what determines the likelihood of long-term care receipt? So the third question is, who primarily provides long-term care for them, and what determines the type of primary long-term care provider in this context. And the last question is, what are the similarities and differences between China and Thailand regarding the patterns and differentials in long-term care needs and receipt? So why China and Thailand? So they are 2 of Asia's most rapidly aging middle-income countries. 1 in 10 of the population will be of age 80 and above by mid-century. And additionally, the cohorts that are soon entering old age in Asia, they are more exposed to risk for chronic illnesses. So therefore, they will be more vulnerable to old age disabilities that require long-term care. So like other Asian settings, long-term care needs for older Chinese and Thais have traditionally been met within family. But with rapid population aging, shrinking family size, as well as the outmigration of adult children, these has raised concerns about family-based long-term care. Also, the 2 countries share similarities in terms of their demographic trajectories that I mentioned before, economic development levels, as well as cultural underpinning regarding filial pieties. However, they contrast quite sharply in terms of kinship systems, which may influence who in the family should provide care for aging parents. And furthermore, the formal state and private long-term care system in China and Thailand are still at a nascent stage of development. So policy in both countries are trying to figure out how to combine family-based, community-based, as well as institutional care to address the growing demand of long-term care. So given that the socioeconomic, political, as well as technological context is constantly evolving in the region, so continuous research into the situation of long-term care needs and receipt among China's and Thailand's older populations remains essential. So in this study, I analyzed nationally representative cross-sectional data from wave 3 of the China Health and Retirement Longitudinal Study and the 2017 round of the survey of older persons in Thailand. So my analytic sample include about 10,000 older Chinese and almost 42,000 older Thais who are age 60 and above. Our dependent variable is long-term care needs and receipt and the type of primary caregiver. So in gerontological research, it's common to use ADL difficulties as a proxy for long-term care needs. And this includes difficulties in getting in and out of bed, toileting, bathing, dressing, and eating. The key independent variables are living arrangements, household wealth, as well as the number and gender composition of children. I also include other sociodemographic variables, including age, gender, marital status, education, as well as urban and rural location. So let me walk you through a little bit describing my sample characteristics. So the mean age of the sample is about 69 in China and about 70 years old in Thailand. The proportion of older persons in Chinese sample that report having one or more ADL difficulties is about 24% compared to about 7% in Thailand. Please note that I will not, I mean, this doesn't mean that, you know, older Chinese adults are more frail than older Thais, but I want to take a note that, you know, that it could be because of the semantic differences between the Chinese and Thais that, and the way that the questions were asked in the questionnaire may affect how these older persons report their ADL difficulties. Nevertheless, among those that have one or more ADL difficulties, about 62% of those in the Chinese sample said that they received care, compared to about 68% among the Thais. And among care recipients in China, 42% of them reported that they are being cared for mainly by their spouse, and about equal proportion said that they are being cared for mainly by their children. For the Thai sample, about 22% reported that they are being cared for by their spouse, and about 68% said that they are primarily being cared for by their children. So let's now move to my first research question: who is more likely to require long-term care? So in both China and Thailand, long-term care needs are not surprisingly increased sharply with age and are higher among the unmarried urban residents, as well as those with no education. And these are independent of age. I also find that there are gender differences in long-term care needs in China, but not in Thailand. In particular, female respondents in China are more likely to report long-term care needs compared to male respondents. In Thailand, I find that co-residence with children is associated with greater long-term care needs, and this probably reflects the facts that these elderly Thais who are frail and needs long-term care live with their children. I didn't find any consistent relationships between household wealth and long-term care needs in both countries. So the next question is, what determines the likelihood of receiving care? I find that in both China and Thailand, care receipt increases with age, but it is inversely related to educational attainment. Living arrangement is an important determinant for both countries. In particular, solo living elders are the least likely to receive care in both countries. I find that gender, marital status, and wealth are important predictors of long-term care receipt, but they show inconsistent associations. Wealth disparity in long-term care receipt in Thailand is noteworthy. In particular, the older Thais in the top 2 wealth quintile are much more likely, are significantly more likely than those in the bottom quintile to receive help when they need long-term care. I find that the number of sons and daughters is not significantly associated with care receipt. So moving to my last question, which is, who primarily care for these elders with long-term care needs? I find that having spouse as primary carer declines with age. Only in Thailand, that we find that each advancing age is associated with having children as the care provider. And women are less likely to report spouse as the main carer. And this is mostly explained by the fact that women are much more likely to outlive their husband. And having sons is not associated with having either spouse or children as the main carer. However, having 2 or more daughters increases the odds of being cared for by children and decreases the likelihood of having a spouse as the main carer in both countries. So this study is not without limitations. So as I mentioned earlier, there are significant challenges in harmonizing key variables in both surveys. The cross-sectional nature of the data also does not allow me to really draw any causality between the key variables of interest. Even though we know who receive and not receiving care, but we don't have any information about the quality of care that they receive and whether or not respondents are satisfied with the care that they received. We also do not have information about a secondary caregiver, and this is important in the context of Asia because even though immediate family members are often reported as the primary caregivers for frail older persons, and this is partly because it's culturally appropriate to do so, but increasingly it is more common, especially in urban areas in China and Thailand, that they are often assisted by non-family members, particularly by domestic workers. And finally, I recognize that there are significant within countries differences in family caregiving that require further investigation, but it's sort of beyond the scope of this study. So in conclusion, at the present time, only a minority of older Chinese and Thais require long-term care. Such demands, however, rise sharply with age and peak around among the oldest old. So at present time, about 2/3 of older Chinese and Thais with long-term care needs receive care assistance. So this means that's about 1/3 experience unmet need for care. Intergenerational co-residence remains one of the most important determinants of long-term care receipt in both countries. And wealth disparity in long-term care receipt is evident in Thailand, but not in China. So this call for the government of Thailand to look into their universal health insurance that focus more on providing medical care, but sort of dismiss the needs for long-term care. So in both countries, the number of and gender composition of children do not matter for long-term care receipt, but the number of daughters significantly determines who the primary caregiver will be. So our evidence join others increasing number of studies that find that there are shifting importance of daughters, sons, and daughter-in-law in long-term care support in the context of China. So looking ahead, long-term care demands will continue to grow because of the sharply rising number of the oldest old. Given the centrality of filial long-term care support, the state should continue to provide assistance for family caregivers and to promote gender equality in caregiving roles. And since intergenerational co-residence is a key determinant for long-term care receipt, the states in both countries should provide housing arrangement and assistance and to encourage adult children to live with or close to their elderly parents. And both the Chinese and Thai government should continue to improve the existing home-based and community-based long-term care programs by try to link these activities with existing community structures, particularly local authorities, religious centers, as well as community-based groups. And finally, affordable institutional care should be made available for frail older person with no family to assist them, particularly those elderly who live alone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Perk. And now let's invite the last speaker, Professor Wang Yi-Chen. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay? Okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity for me to share what geographers are doing in Thailand related to this foodborne disease, liver fluke infection. So I will start with some background about this health issue, liver fluke. This is a, let me just make sure that the key is working. Yeah, okay. This is a foodborne disease or foodborne parasite. Meaning that the transmission is through food, and in this case, consumption of raw or undercooked fish dishes such as raw fish porridge, Yu-Shen, and raw fish salad, like koi pla in Thailand. So the map you're looking at shows you the species that I've been working on, which is Opis phocis riverina, and I'll just refer to it as OV in the talk here. You can see the higher prevalence, which is indicated by red color, is mainly along the Mekong River. Yeah. So there are also other types of foodborne parasites in Southeast Asia and also in other countries, such as you can see another species in southern China. And together, these foodborne parasites, their infection, it is estimated that more than 750 million people worldwide are at risk. And they mainly affect the marginalized population in the developing regions, causing billions of dollars in treatment every year. So another health concern about liver fluke infection, and specifically OV that I'm working on, is that it's not just people infected got several worms in the stomach, but there's actually more severe health consequences because OV has been classified as a group 1 carcinogen to this fatal bile duct cancer, has this long name cholangiocarcinoma here. The cancer is highly aggressive, and most patients do not survive 1 year past diagnosis. So what is this parasite? What's the life cycle of that? Compared to some other parasites, it's actually rather complex because it also involves snail and also cyprin and fish as the intermediate host. So when a person is infected with the parasite eggs is transmitted into freshwater environment, perhaps because of the sanitation practice or the sewage infrastructure development may not be well developed. So the egg of the parasite doesn't hatch directly in the water. It has to ingest it by snail and then go through several developmental stages. So the health issue actually has been ongoing for several decades, and many countries have control programs to tackle this issue. But primarily, these control programs focus on biomedical intervention, which means it's focusing on giving drugs to deworm from human bodies. It actually helped to bring down some of the infection prevalence, but mostly is in the short term, because once the control program stopped, then the re-emergence of disease is quite common. So when geographers look at this health issue, we think that in addition to human beings, there are also the intermediate host and also their habitats that we need to look together. And the other pattern that geographers also interested in is the uneven distribution of the infection. So what you're looking at here is in Northeast Thailand, across different provinces and also across different districts for the prevalence of OV infection, indicated by different colors here. So we can see that at different scales, there are different levels of infection. And to geographers, what we're interested in is what are the underlying factors possibly contributing to this kind of spatial variation of liver fluid infection. So what I'll be sharing with you are several analyses that we have done. There will be some background research questions and then results in the next couple of slides. So for the first analysis I'm going to share with you, this one is done at a more broad scale. And by broad scale, I mean we look into about 90 plus villages across the whole Northeast Thailand. And one of the research questions that we ask is, do the surrounding land use composition and land use dominance of human settlement affect OV prevalence variation? So what we did is using geographic information system to map the human OV prevalence. Like what you can see here, each circle represents a village with their prevalence of infection. And then for these villages, we use remote sensing to classify and obtain their land use distribution of their surroundings. So after we did that for all the villages that we analyzed, we then use landscape metrics to quantify land use patterns. By patterns, I mean that there can be different kind of patch densities, shape, and dominance. So even though two areas may have the same composition in terms of percentage of land use and cover types, the pattern distribution difference could actually potentially affect different kind of disease transmission risk. So what we found out is that just one quick result to share. In terms of land use composition, the water and also what we refer to as high water farmland, these are mainly rice paddies, does have a positive association with the OV prevalence, whereas farmland that does not require much water has a negative association. And we look into several landscape metrics, and the one I'm highlighting here is dominance, measure the largest land use patch surrounding the study area. And what we find out is that if the villages, their surroundings have a large water patch, particularly like reservoir or extensive rice paddies, then they could provide suitable habitats for the intermediate host of the parasite, potentially contributing to the high prevalence of the infection in the village. So rice paddies and reservoirs, these land use types are important. So the next two analyses, I'll focus on each of them respectively. So the second analysis to share with you is we then look into the connection between human and also the snail here. And for the snails, we have some other ecological studies and find out that among different water body types, rice paddies are the main habitat the snail prefers. We can find high species abundance there. And to look into the connection between human and snail, this is also important because this is the phase where the parasite is introduced into the water environment. So for this analysis, one of the research questions we ask is, do different degrees of habitat patch connections across the study sites affect the overall parasitic infection in Bithynia snail? So this is a smaller scale analysis, meaning that because it involves field work to collect a lot of snails, so we only focus on 3 sites, which are shown on the map here. So we collect snails and then check on them in the lab for their infection. That's for the snail infection. For human settlements, we use GPS to locate their houses and also some other important landscape features like septic tanks and toilets. Also, we map out the snail habitat patches in the study area. And in the field work, we also record the water flow because that gives the indication of the connectivity. Yeah, so all of these are then used in GIS to do the subsequent analysis. And to the connectivity, we also use network analysis. And what you're looking at on the slide here, on the left-hand side, these are the distribution of the different landscape patches. On the right-hand side here, it shows the network space of those habitat patches and houses, their connectivity. So each node here is actually representing some sort of feature on the landscape. So we then quantify these networks using graph measures. And I'm highlighting two measures here, which is node in degree and also components. This is probably quite familiar, quite familiar to some of you who work on social network analysis. The disease that we're working on here, when we look at node in degree of snail patch, if you see higher numbers, that means that snail patch is more connected to other snail patches, which means that the disease transmission into that snail patch is much easier. Whereas component here, it shows how well the landscape is connected in the context of the research here. So from the table, you can see that among the three sites, site KL has the highest node in degree, and also the component is the largest for site KL. When we compare with the snail infections that we found from the lab, so the bottom table here shows OV parasite and also some other parasites that we can find from Bithynia snail. And you can see that it does have a lot more different types of parasites that can be found. So I think what this shows is that the different levels of connections between the host habitats, they may affect the potential disease transmission. And the third analysis I'm going to share is related to reservoir. And it is a reservoir at the border of the two provinces in Northeast Thailand here. And for this study, we focus on infection in fish and also infection in snake, in human. So we collect fish sample and also human fecal sample, and also to conduct questionnaire survey to obtain social, economic, and behavioral factors to do the analysis. So zooming to the reservoir, we focus on these 4 villages on the map here. And you can see that I label them as river versus reservoir because some of them are closer to the river, some are right next to the reservoir. And this is important for geographers because we can then look into the physical environmental factors in terms of the river villages versus reservoir villages, and also the fish samples they obtain from river habitat versus reservoir habitat. Yeah. So the first question we ask is then, do different water bodies have different fish infection rates? And what do we find out from the fish samples and human sample, fecal sample we collect? What we found is that you can see there are different fish species here, but if I bring your attention to the average here, you can see the infection density is much higher in the reservoir. This means that if people get fish from the reservoir, then the risk of infection is possibly higher when compared to people get fish from the river habitat. What about the human fecal sample result? So here I'm comparing river villages versus the reservoir villages. And there are 2 different measures used in terms of the prevalence of infection, how many % of people sampled infected versus intensity of infection, which is quantified by looking into the number of parasite eggs that can be found per gram of fecal sample. What we found is that you can see a much longer black bar here, which means the intensity of infection is much higher for the reservoir villages. And this corresponds to our fish result. So again, I think this highlights that depending on the water body type, whether that's reservoir or river, they can affect different level of exposure for human in terms of the risk of infection. The next couple of slides actually, I think only 2 slides are about socioeconomic data analysis. So we analyzed the questionnaire, and then what we find out is that the infection increase with age, and male has higher risk of infection. And not surprisingly, if they have raw fish consumption, then the risk of infection is much higher. We also asked more about the reasons for consumption. And what we found is that participants who are unaware, so when they say no, they are unaware of liver fluke, unaware of the possible health consequence. They are more likely to say they like to eat raw fish dish because it is delicious. And in terms of location, the North villages versus South villages, the South villages are more likely to say they eat it out of habit, and male are more likely to eat with friends in more social occasions compared to female. So I think this shows that in terms of the social interaction, there are gender differences. And this is something that we should also consider when we talk about different kind of health intervention. The final thing we ask is related to the healthcare focus. So if we look at the distribution of the 4 villages here, the North 2 villages actually located in Nong Pua Lampu province, and the South villages located in another province, Khon Kaen province. So this allows us to look into how do health care centers in different provinces, their priorities, how does that affect OV infection in the community. So we interviewed the health center workers and staff, and what we find out is that for the 4 villages, actually not many of them focus on parasitic disease as the top health concerns. Only the North River village has focused on parasitic disease in the past several years. So there are differences in terms of the health priorities by the local health center. And in terms of the CCA, this is a bioduct cancer prevention program. So this prevention program has been sort of promoted in Northeast Thailand, but it looks like different provinces also have different level of adoption in terms of the prevention program. So we found that the North villages actually adopt the prevention program, and this may explain why the prevalence is lower in the North villages compared to the South village. So yeah, so I think what I'm sharing with you is the geospatial analysis that we have been doing in terms of looking into possible risk factors for liver fluke infection, in terms of looking at land use types and landscape connectivity, also the role of reservoir, the habitat it creates that can potentially create different kind of human exposure to the parasite infection. And finally, the health care focus that can also contribute to the variation of the infection, even though they are all villages nearby a reservoir, but because of different priorities that could potentially result in a different kind of risk. Yeah, so finally, just to acknowledge students who work on these as their thesis topic, and also collaborators, and all this work cannot be done with a lot of help from our field and lab assistant. Yeah, so that would be all from me.
Thank you very much, Ichan. We have about 15 minutes. And now let's start the Q&A session. May I invite Jack to start first? Jack, because you are at the panel, you can speak.
Sure. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right. I really enjoyed all 4 presentations. Okay, but I only have I only want to ask question to one presenter, who is Professor Vincent Chua I think you already saw my question in the chat, but just for because we're recording this for YouTube, so people know my question is that in your study, basically you look at word of mouth network on the one hand, and then the acclaimed university degree on the other, and compare how people of high or lower class look for jobs through these two kinds of means. So my question is, one has to do with Singapore's government. There are lots of government assistance, for young adults to find jobs. Another one is about, I know my students are using JobsDB or JobStreet. So they're this online, job hunting services. So my question probably has to do, on the one hand, is government's role. The other side is this website, apps, and how do you measure them, and do they relate to, maybe conceptually, do they belong to word of mouth network or the other category, and how effective do they make a difference for people of higher or lower class?
Thanks, Prof. Chu, for that question. Can I invite my co-presenter Irene Y.H to address this question, because I think she's more familiar with the details of each question that are being asked. There's some of it we do ask those questions, but I think Irene is in a better position to give the details concerning those. Irene?
Yes. Hi, Prof. Chu. Thanks for the questions. Actually, your questions are exactly why we designed the job search questions the way we did. We were thinking about online search because we're looking at a young profile, and we're also wondering about how government employment agencies help, because especially our interest is on lower wage workers, right? So interestingly, with regard to the latter, which is the government agencies, if you noted from Vincent's presentation, among the job search strategies, employment agencies is one of them, right? And government agencies is in there. 33% of our lower income used employment agencies compared to 21%. But among those employment agencies, we also asked them to name which kind of agency, and the government ones, E2I and WSG, formed only a small portion of it. Yeah. And then we asked, what is the effective strategy, right? Then the effective strategy that they actually found is only 5%, 4% using these government agencies. Yeah, so it's descriptive right now, but to us, it's showing that actually use of employment agency, number one, is not ranked as highly as the other forms. And number two, even if they use them, they're not as effective in landing a job. The most effective then is what your other question is about, the online platforms. That's the most used and most effective, and I think JobStreet is one of them.
Thanks, Irene.
Okay, thank you. I hope this answer is good for Jack.
Thanks.
Let's move to the panel. I think there's several questions there. To give Vincent and Irene a break, let me raise the question firstly for Puck. Liu Yan asked a question about the urban-rural division in China and Thailand, and would like you to talk a little bit more about this disparity in terms of long-term care. Yeah.
Sure, thank you. I was about to type the answer. Anyway, so I was looking at the results, right? I find that in our data, I find that I do not find a statistically significant difference in long-term care receipt among urban and rural elders in both China and Thailand. The odds of long-term care receipt is higher for both countries, but they are not statistically significant. But her interpretation that, maybe urban elderly are more likely to enjoy welfare support more than those in rural area could possibly be true. But I mean, at least at the present time, I don't see that, distinct differences. And it could largely because by and large, family are the main source of long-term care provision for elderly with long-term care needs now, but that might change in the future. So thank you, Luyan.
Thank you, Book. Let me ask a question for Professor Bao first, and then we go to the panel. Professor Bao, I have a question on your research. So this research, I feel, have a great implication for intervention. So what do you think will be the potential to improve the speaking capacity in intervention? That's the first question. A second question is, I know that you are focusing on the verbal communication. So is there any research in that field focusing on the written informations? Yeah, that's just my two questions of mine. Yeah. You are muted, Professor.
Mute. Okay.
Yeah.
On intervention, the people at the medical school, Professor Chua and Professor Rati Mahendra, they would be the specialists doing it, but we are actually at the early stage to explore whether it is possible to devise intervention strategies to slow down the progression of the pathology. There is no cure for it. So if there is any, let's say, brain tissue damage, there is no cure. But then hopefully there might be some intervention methods to do it. I don't know, but I discussed it with Prof. Kwan at the medical school briefly about what I'm thinking about doing is to, let's say, if now another aspect which I didn't touch this time is that the speech in people with MCI, people with memory problem, are very abstract. You know, contrary to our common sense. So common sense would say people have you know, kind of cognitive issues, their speech would be more concrete. But actually, no, the speech is more abstract. So in other words, memory may affect what the psychologists call episodic memory, namely imageability is also a very important part of the representation of meaning of a noun, for instance. You know, apple, for instance, you think of the image of apple. So that's the sort of thing that we're. So I'm thinking of that maybe we'll devise readings and things of that sort that will address that. In other words, to train the memories that will be doing that. But then we don't know. We haven't started it yet. But we still need to finish the linguistics first. And we are only doing linguistics because I won't be able to diagnose a patient. Yes, in terms of we are focusing on spoken thing, and but there are studies by linguists who look at the writings of people with dementia. The most famous study in the U.S. involves nuns. You know, the Catholic nuns. They have about 100 Catholic nuns. Who have all passed away, and they have records of the nuns since very early on. So this is if you Google the nun study, they will show what, you know, when the nun is young, and then she will write diaries and things of that sort, and they analyze that, and then. In other words, if the writing is thin in ideas, it's more likely that that person will develop dementia. Because this is a longitudinal study of 100 nuns, some of whom have dementia in old age, but of course many were healthy. So that was also another. I think it would be, you know, there's Iris Murdoch. Was a very well-known English novelist. And so people who did study her writings over the time and see how it changes. There are people, but you see, the writing is difficult to get. In fact, I was trying to Google writings to study writings by Jayaratnam. Jayaratnam died of dementia, old age, in fact. But he was diagnosed with dementia in the 70s, I think, or 80s. And his speech, except that sometimes I worry that it's the speech writers who wrote them, so it's not really useful. But if he also writes short stories, but it was very early in his career, so he was most likely not suffering from, let's say, early stages of dementia. Yes, there are studies like that. But the kind of study I'm doing, namely recording natural speech, 10 minutes, and then I'll be able to say something about the cognitive state. I think that's new. So I'm very careful about whether the data, if the data are supportive, I need to be extremely careful because it has not been done before.
Thank you.
The linguistic intervention also has not been attempted by doctors.
Okay, thank you. Very promising field. Sorry, let me move to a question for Professor Wang Yi-Chen. The research is very interesting. I myself also doing health, but I never imagined to incorporate so many biological, environmental, and ecological factors into the study, particularly in the spirit of this forum. We should in the future. I have a question about this kind of disciplinary boundary. In your analysis, I do feel like you want to incorporate not only biological and environmental factors, but also addressing the social, economic, and then demographic variables into the analysis. But I do have the feeling that there is a priority or hierarchy in terms of explanation. So in your view, to fully explain the OV prevalence, do you think in the future we may put all these factors in an equal way, or what will be the future in your discipline to incorporate more of the social and economic factors in analysis? Yeah.
Thank you for highlighting that. I do want to say that it could probably because of my background as a physical geographer and also GIS person that I share more about results related to habitats and also network analysis. We do have ongoing social dynamic kind of investigation that's carry on, and definitely that part is crucial because the cultural embedded context definitely needs to be considered, because I think in along the Mekong region, it is considered as a tradition to eat raw fish. So there are a lot of cultural, social dynamics that we need to look into, and we have more in-depth analysis and interview in the villages. That's actually in another paper that I didn't share. Yeah, so I would say all aspects have to be considered, but probably because of my background, I focus more on physical and GIS here. So anybody interested in more social dynamic related analysis, please contact me. I can share the paper with you. Yeah, but thanks for asking that question for me to have the opportunity to make up that point. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Professor Wang. I guess I asked the same question to myself as a sociologist. I need to incorporate more of the environmental factors. Okay, we have three questions, two questions for Vincent and Irene. And the first question is from Nanxun. I think Nanxun asked more details about the sample of the study, and also asked whether the study also show the income gaps among people using different kind of searching method. And Irene, would you like to answer that?
We've answered it in the chat, so maybe Vincent can answer the other question then.
Oh, sure.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Then let me repeat the question to Vincent. Firstly, Gil Hermy asked for a working paper from you.
Yeah.
Please just directly contact Vincent.
Yeah.
In order to that, he would like to ask, how do you define human capital? And then finally, you mentioned that high income respond find new opportunities where co-workers would that not increase their outside option or bargaining power and allow them to search for longer? And also, do you capture information about previous employment in your survey? And have you explored difference between high and low income groups?
Yeah, thanks very much, Guilherme, for these questions. Human capital, we've measured it in terms of level of education, right? So that's our measure of human capital. The other two questions, the first pertains to whether non-searchers actually search longer and whether that in fact opens up more opportunities and options to bargain. Unfortunately, we don't ask how long they search, right? So for the job that they presently got, we don't actually know how long they've actually searched to get the job and whether in fact it was a protracted process as opposed to a quick match, right? We've measured non-searching, but respondents basically choose only one, and they didn't have the option to say they use multiple methods to get that same job, right? So we basically asked them to think about the most frequent method, and that became the method that was used in the job search as opposed to juggling multiple different kinds of methods to secure the job, right? So that's my response to the third question. The response to the last one about whether we've captured information about previous job stints and so on, I don't think we do that. We have information on current jobs. So if a person is holding multiple jobs at the same time, job 1, 2, and 3, we have information about that. But we certainly don't ask the history of how they got those jobs. Those other jobs. We have the history for the main job. Yeah, only the main job, right? But we don't have job 2 and 3. We didn't also ask for those. Irene, sorry.
Oh yeah, I was just clarifying that we did ask information about previous jobs, but you're right, not in how they search for those jobs.
Yeah.
Only the first job. Only the first job.
So we have the method of getting that first job, but we didn't apply the same questions to the other jobs that were gotten previously. So basically asking about network information about the main job. Thank you.
Thank you, Vincent. We are running out of time, and I would like to thank all the speakers for the wonderful studies. Again, this is a wonderful session. We see like a great varieties of research methodology and then research concern and research data. And then I hope you also enjoy it, and see you soon in another session of this forum. Good afternoon. See you.